The time is exactly 9:38 a.m. We are now going to be talking with Diego Iturralde. He is with Stats South Africa, and of course, he looks into the issues around demography and population statistics. We have been told that the total world population was projected to reach 8 billion people yesterday, the 15th of November. So, how does this reflect in the world order, so to speak, moving forward? What sort of implications are we talking about? Do we need to control this population explosion? Is it needed in the 21st century? And how do we move forward in terms of, I guess, supplying food? There's going to be impacts on migration, and I have no doubt in my mind that climate too, or climate change, is going to be playing a very huge role as far as the world population is concerned. Diego Iturralde, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning to you, and thank you so much for having me.
Is this a concern that the world population has reached the number of 8 billion? We're talking globally. And you have heard my opening statement regarding food security or insecurity, however you look at it, migration issues, and very definitely climate change. I should imagine all of that was taken into consideration. I presume research has been done regarding when these stats were being put together.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you have identified three of the key issues around the global population. Um, I think that reaching the milestone of 8 billion, however, it's not a matter of concern. It's rather a moment where we can pause, reflect, and celebrate on the achievements that we have made so far. Life expectancy has risen by at least 10 years since the 1960s globally. If we have a look in South Africa, maternal mortality has declined by over 80%. Infant mortality has declined by just under 40%. So we have made great strides in terms of the quality of life of individuals. However, you raise 3 points that about food security, which I would link to environmental demands. In other words, is the planet able to provide enough resources for a population of this size? There may be concerns also in some parts of the world about falling fertility rates. There may be concerns about migration being out of control. All three of these concerns, or I won't refer to them as concerns here, but rather perceptions, are not valid in the sense that if we have a look at migration, only about 3.5% of the world's population lives in a country outside of their own. However, climate change is a real issue. It's a real concern because greenhouse emissions are being released mostly by the high income countries who are in the minority, and unfortunately, it is the middle to low income countries who are suffering the brunt of climate change effects. So the real takeaway message around the world at 8 billion is about making choices and making the right types of decisions that take demographic change into account, which enables a better life for all of us, and to be cognizant of demographic changes that we are likely to be exposed to as we move to the next billion, which is expected to occur in 2037. What are the demographic changes that we anticipate between now 8 billion and 9 billion in 15 years' time?
Okay, so as you speak, there's so many other issues that's popped into my head. Let's go back to the issue of migration. I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that globally we're only looking at 3%. Undoubtedly, political instability in countries all around the world is going to add to that figure of 3%. I really thought it was way, way above 3%.
Yes, I'm aware that there is that kind of perception. When we talk about migration, I mean, migration happens for a wide variety of reasons. People migrate voluntarily for work purposes or for family reunification, or really for lifestyle change. But there's also types of forced migration, which is as a result of internal displacement, which is mostly internal, as the name suggests, but also refugees in terms of political instability, in terms of climate change. People may even be forced to move because economic circumstances in their country have resulted in it being unlivable in certain parts of the country, and people need to move. So these things operate in cycles. I mean, we see the outflow of refugees from Ukraine into Central Europe, and it's likely that this is a cyclical. Hopefully, the war will end at some point in time, hopefully soon, and these refugees will be able to return to their country. In the event that individuals are unable to return for the country because of fear of persecution, of course, these people will remain outside of the country. But I think that globally, as I indicated, we are sitting at 3.5%. In South Africa, we're sitting at about 7.5% of people living in South Africa who are not born here. And these are proportions which are fairly stable. Something really out of the ordinary would have to happen in order to make a change on these types of trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, unfortunately, something like a third world war, please God, that doesn't happen. Let's look at the aging population. That
Yes.
brings with it, well, as far as older people are concerned, that's good news, because we all want to live as long as possible, but lead a very healthy life. But that
Yes.
does also bring with it its own challenges. An older population means more resources are needed as far as their healthcare and other provisions are concerned. How does that
Yes.
kind of play out, not only in South Africa, but globally?
Yes. Well, I read an article yesterday, just after we had the media launch of the world at 8 billion, that said that the so-called population time bomb has been diffused, but the real time bomb is that of aging. In South Africa, we expect that by the year 2050, our aging population, those are over the age of 60, will almost double from 9.2% to 16% of the population. Globally, the proportion should be a little bit higher. It's probably just over 20%, 20 to 25%, if I'm not mistaken. And what this means is that as people live longer, we need to invest in their health. We need to invest in the type of support that elderly people need in order to live at that age. Usually, when elderly people live that much longer, it goes hand in hand with people having fewer children. And as fewer children enter the labor market, it means that there are fewer working people who are paying the pension of the elderly people. So there is a retirement element to this. There's also an element that as we have fewer children being born, but surviving to older ages, the workforce is smaller, and this workforce needs to be supplemented by migrants on the one hand, or we see in the global north that those countries whose populations are very old and that are leveling out or declining are actually the countries where we see a lot of innovation in things such as AI and big data and all these kind of things, which would require a smaller workforce, or which would automate a sizable proportion of the workforce, which would be of benefit to all countries around the world. So the issue of population aging certainly brings it's good news on the one hand, but it brings a lot of challenges and questions to think about that we haven't had to think about in the past.
I always wondered about AI. I kind of, especially in the South African context, the issue around the high unemployment rate, and felt that perhaps, and I mean, maybe it's not an argument to be really taken seriously, but my thinking was that we have way too high an unemployment rate in the country to even think about AI, because it's going to further streamline job opportunities. But of course, as you rightly say, it answers the situation in Germany, for example, where they have an aging population and not enough young people to support this aging population and to fill in the gaps of available jobs. So that would be the answer. And answer number two would be migration. People from third world countries who fleeing their countries for whatever reason could then fill that space. So, I guess there has to be a balance.
Yes.
I've got a few minutes left with you, at least 2 or 3 minutes before I wrap up the interview. What's intrigued me for a very long time is, in the past, I think it's changed now, China's one-child policy. How did that play out in China? And if a similar policy or law has to be enforced in other countries, do you think it could be workable? And do you think that would then answer the population explosion, if I can use that terminology?
Well, let me re-emphasize that I don't think there is a population explosion to speak of. I think the one-child policy in China had limited success. It certainly has reduced the population, but at great cost to the Chinese population, where there is a deficit of females in the Chinese population. So much so that by next year, we will see India overtake China as the most populous country in the world. And as a matter of fact, as we move towards 9 billion, China will not be one of the contributors towards the growth of the world's population towards 9 billion. That growth will come from 8 countries mainly. Those will be in Africa, the DRC, Egypt, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Nigeria, and in Asia from the Philippines, India, and Pakistan. So I would say that a one-child policy, or any type of policy that tries to artificially manipulate people's fertility choices, whether to have more children or whether to have less children, have never succeeded around the world. Even in European countries where they're encouraging people to have more children by giving them tax breaks and education subsidies and things like that, have not resulted in a change in people's fertility. People's fertility is a rational choice that people make as a result of their life world. And for as long as humanity has existed, our choice to have a number of children, it's influenced by our culture, it's influenced by our aspirations and things like that, and certainly not influenced by external forces coming from a centralized government. So I would certainly leave it at that.
Complete your thought, please.
I would say I would just leave it at that, and indicate that such policies would not enjoy much success.
Okay, my controller is breathing down my back, saying that we're out of time, but I need to get 2 very important questions through as well. Regarding your research regarding the 8 billion mark that we've reached, did it indicate more more male children or more female children? Was sex anywhere determined in the study, and is there perhaps a cause for concern there? Because if you have too many men or too many women, it's also going to skew how we move forward in terms of population regeneration.
Right. So the 8 billion is an output from the World Population Prospects, which is a report done by the UN Population Division every 2 years. It uses data that is collected from around the world in population censuses and other data sources. And like I've indicated, in China, there is a surplus of males. At a global level, however, this evens out, and the proportion of males to females is quite standard if we look at it in a global perspective. So I don't think there is a concern around that.
Okay, and last but not least, the all-important question is the waste we are creating. 8 billion people around the world are creating tons, a trillion tons of waste on an annual or a daily basis. Have governments given a thought to this, and what are we going to do with all of this wastage? Perhaps send it to space? And I say that pretty seriously because we know that landfills are just not the answer.
Yeah, well, let me say from the outset that Statistics South Africa, we don't insert ourselves in the policy space, but we rather collect information which allows the policymakers to make the right choices. However, the points that you raise around climate change and greenhouse emissions is very valid. Like I said earlier, most of the greenhouse emissions are being produced by high-income countries, which are of course in the minority. And we are just wrapping up the COP27 meeting in Egypt this week, where we're all working towards reducing this kind of wastage and making sure that the consumption of resources becomes more equitable and more balanced around the world, because it is not population per se that causes unsustainability, but unequal use of resources that does that.
I think we need to have another conversation to unpack all of this in much more detail. Fascinating talking to you this morning. Thank you indeed for your time and your insights. Till the next time, as always, go well.
Thank you so much.
The time is exactly 9:55. Standing by to talk to me is one of my favorite people, and that, of course, is Sandile Swana. He's a political analyst, and we are going to be looking at the deadline on Cyril Ramaphosa's issue looming closer and closer. And, of course, we are talking about the Phala answers regarding Phala. So please do stand by.